Hey, this is Gerd Handel, and welcome to the Inner Light Project. This show is for anyone who's wanting to lead a happier, healthier, and enlightened life. Create more self-love, inject more joy and abundance into their daily life. Join me for inspiring interviews and spiritual topics so you can shine your inner light. To another episode of the Inner Light Project. My name is Gerd Handel, and today I want to share with you somebody who is helping people to really understand their astrological charts. Brad Williams is the founder of North Noding Consulting, which helps people to align with their ultimate soul purpose. He's an astrological counselor and works with individuals, groups and businesses of all sizes to help them to open the door to whatever is holding them back. Hi Brad, I'm so grateful to having the show and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, bless you. I just want to share what your life, like when we've just been talking now, just hearing what you're talking about is so fascinating. But I want to go back to what your life was like before you became an astrological counselor.
Gosh, do we have hours upon hours to talk today?
Go for it.
So if I had a book, it would be called The Thinking Man's Dreamer.
Wow.
For the Enneagram folks out there, I'm a 5-wing 4. And depending on what day it is, sometimes that 4 can definitely be a more predominant factor in my existence. Feeling so much, but also in my head so much. And so growing up in an environment in which I was raised by my grandparents, who were the epitome of the divine feminine and the divine masculine, but also being around a whole lot of chaos. My life was really structured in a way to, one, teach myself survival, the coping mechanisms that we all develop in early childhood, and sometimes when things aren't going our way, to help us get along with life. And then also at the same time to have a beautiful example of two people that existed in a place where the words divine feminine and divine masculine never came out of their mouth, but they were it. And so what led me to astrology in the late 90s, I've been practicing for 25 years now, was just the simple fact that I was lost, found spirituality and religion and a Christian bent, had questions around that because I'm from Virginia Beach and the Association for Research and Enlightenment is there along with Edgar Cayce. And so there were a lot of questions I had within the fundamental ideals around Christianity. And I love all religions at this point in time. But back then I just had questions. And one of those questions was, when did the prophet stop? And my preacher at the time, his name is Jerry Barber, gave me 3 words that freed me from pretty much everything. He said, there's 3 words that can never get you in trouble. And it's, I don't know. So that allowed me just to kind of start to research the history of the faith I believed in at the time and go down this whole road. And not to belabor this, but keep going. But the book that really opened the door to really look into other things was The Celestine Prophecy. And that book had just came out back in the late 90s. And I was like, oh my gosh, so many of these things in here I feel, I see, I've experienced. And maybe as a child, it was Star Wars and Yoda that was sort of guiding that. But then I started to have words for it, energy, psychic sensitivity, intuition, like all these kind of things. And so as that started to unfold, I let go of the dogmatic grip of the religious path that I was on and embraced a more fluid and spiritual path without boundaries. But interesting enough, later on, I've created some boundaries, which were needed. But at the time, I needed to kind of destroy them all to sort of experience lots of different ways of life that would unfold for me later to lead me to being a professional astrologer in 2008. And also many other things that maybe we can get into more detail later.
Wow. It's just so fascinating with what you're saying. Like, I totally understand where you're coming from. I grew up in a religious background as well. I'm Sikh. So my parents, we went to the temple every Sunday, but it was like you said, I always had questions like, why do we do this? What's the reason behind it? But it never made sense. And, I'd sit there and meditate, but I'd be looking around the room going, why am I doing this? And so as I got older, I kind of distanced myself. And, we have, life happens, you get angry with God and, how
Yeah.
things happen. And then I went on this deep journey from within when I was 25. So that was about, 11 years ago. And my heart just broke open. And I remember it's just like, it's time to heal. And then suddenly, like you said, like the boundaries when I had like, I just went to go find myself. I tried so many different things in spirituality. I ended up doing loads of trauma work, not realizing that would end up becoming my profession. I'm now a trauma coach.
Yeah.
So it's amazing when things happen, like it all happens in divine timing. And like now, like yourself, like I've learned how to have boundaries. But the boundaries before were so different to how they are now. Now it feels right and it feels aligned, whereas before it was what we were told to and how to behave and how to think and how to act. Those kind of boundaries came from that kind of, I guess, place of fear. When I look back, it wasn't a place of love, the boundaries. And so, yeah, I think it's amazing that you were able to step out of it and find who you truly are and who you are meant to be and what you're here to share in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm still on that journey. I mean, it's been several incarnations since the late 90s. I'm on my third marriage,
Wow.
and predominantly and fundamentally in my chart, relationship patterning is definitely the lessons of my wholeness.
Mm.
And it's definitely coming from a karmic past life perspective of the feminine. There's no doubt that whatever incarnation that I am working on from the perspective of my chart this lifetime I was a female.
Mm.
And my wife, now Lauren, she was a male. There's just no doubt about it. Whether I am interpreting the charts or just many of my psychic, colleagues and people telling me that there is a certain uh, femininity to me in a way that is presented um, within the framework of what I'm learning in this lifetime, and also really learning about masculinity and learning the
Mm.
virtues of it. And so thankful I had my grandfather, who was just this divine Pisces, who gave off the strength of masculinity and its virtues, without the demanding, sort of egotistical, shadowy side of masculinity. And I got a lot of that from my friends and other, my parents and stuff like that. But it's been so important to understand through the astrological lens, that relationship patterning and learning to not be loved for my utility, which I think a lot
Mm.
of my female clients, I've helped through understanding that from my own lens, because, in so many ways, the feminine is about the nurturer, and that can fall into so many ways codependency. And
Oh, yeah.
so that's been a lot of my kind of growth in this lifetime, is to be a good Virgo with a Cancer moon and be helpful, but not do it because I want somebody to love me. And
Mm.
that's where I'm at in my final relationship, which I feel very strongly about. Um, and we have a very good rapport in our ability to have disagreement. Um, Lauren and I were just at Necker Island, which is, Richard Branson Island, and we were there for Forming Impact. And,
Amazing.
and Richard asked us, what do we feel is the thing most needed for a long-term relationship? And I sort of jokingly but seriously said, being able to fight well.
Mm.
Because from my past experiences, and not really fight, but just be able to have disagreement, respectful disagreement. Because, and looking at your chart in a little bit of a way we can get into later, compromise is not your avenue of success.
Oof.
Um, and so, yeah, so it's for you in so many ways, compromise pleases nobody. You're really learning the essence of your North Node in Aries, which is very masculine. But getting
Yeah.
back, I'll lose track of what I was saying. It's just, it's been really important to understand the idea around what relationship patterning is, with me and currently in the relationship that I'm in, that I don't have to be a doormat. I don't have to say,
Mm,
I'll do everything for you only to become bitter, because
mm,
in many ways, and being the hard-headed man that I can be, in past relationships, I could say I would do things for them that they never even asked for. So maybe I'm a better listener now. What did
mm.
you ask for? And maybe Lauren, and in her growth through her own relationship pattern, actually knows how to ask specifically what she wants. And so that has led to us at this middle age part of our life to have a relationship that is tremendously beautiful and growth centered, and not always easy, but at the same time just magical in its complexity and also simplicity.
I love that you're showing this because I think a lot of people don't realize that we all have masculine and feminine energy.
Mhm.
However, it's learning what's the healthy side of both, because we can either have wounded masculine, wounded feminine, or we can have both wounded. But the key is to find the healthy side of both of them. And just like what you're saying, like I grew up, you've got to toughen up, you've got to be like a guy in a man's world. And I used to be a journalist, and like I look back at that journey, it's like yuck. And so I was like this alpha female, and I look back, I'm like, that was never me. And I didn't know how to soften myself because I grew up in a very tough environment. We get on with things. My parents are Indian, so it's the whole immigrant mentality when they come here. Whereas my mum's is very soft and gentle. She's got Cancer in her sign. Very soft woman, but very strong. So
Yeah.
again, it was always about toughening up. We're hard workers. And so when I started to heal that wound, it was just like, wow, these emotions would come out of nowhere and be like, what's wrong with me? And I had to learn how to balance that. And I felt so much guilt
Yeah.
crying because I grew up, and a lot of women and a lot of men as well actually have been taught, crying is weak, but actually crying is strength. The fact that you're able to release your emotions and get it out of your body is so powerful. That's when we set ourselves free. That's when we allow our inner child to come back home to itself. And I don't think, with what you're saying, like I don't think there's anything wrong with having that feminine side in guys, because I think we need that gentleness in all of us. When we have that gentleness, we're able to speak our truth. It's the power of speaking it and like asking for what we want as well. But with the feminine energy, it's also about boundaries. Feminine energy is actually about boundaries. It's not masculine that has boundaries, it's the feminine side. But also the feminine side is expression, creativity, birthing things, whereas the masculine is more about taking action and getting out there and being more assertive.
Yeah, and in so many ways too, that when we look at astrology, we both have a Mars and we both have a Venus. No matter who we are, no matter what we identify with, none of that matters when we look at the chart and know that within the balance
Mm.
of the chart, what is afflicted in our Mars, which is masculine, what is afflicted in our Venus, but also what are the strengths coming out of those. And
Mhm.
so I'll spend some time, not always directly talking about, that specifically, but looking at sometimes if somebody such as yourself has a Mars in the 12th house, sometimes it's very difficult within your masculine faculties to understand the power of you. You also have a Scorpio Mercury conjunct Pluto, and there's so much power within you that's driven through a masculine lens that it can sometimes, maybe scare you with all that power. And so maybe some of the work that we would be doing together would be, embracing more of that power and understanding that power in and of itself is not bad. It's only when it's tyrannical is when it's bad.
Yeah.
Because in the sense of what power really is within the essence of our truth, it is the foundation of our spirit and our destiny. And so for you in
Mm.
this lifetime, having the Aries in North Node, it is the ability of understanding that you can be alone. You can be by yourself. You can not have to, depend on the validation of another lover, looking at you and making you feel whole in that way, which might have been part of what had happened in a previous incarnation within you. Basically, hallucinatory loss of self into another person, being overly identified by that person with the South Node in Libra, conjunct the Mars, but being on the male side of that, because so many
Wow.
times, we look at it in history and we can read our romantic novels, which I adore, or romantic comedies and all of that. And we have, the guy, who is, has virtues in of itself, but sort of, you know, putting those aside for an unavailable lover and that kind of thing. And so, it kind of goes both ways on that when we look at sort of romantic, if you want to call it tragedies in our, myths that we've written over the years. Maybe more predominantly famous for women, but there are still plenty of men out there that have been trampled upon the wake of, the siren of Ulysses was sort of metaphorical of that, men being enraptured by women and their grace and their beauty and losing sight of their own self for, call it lust if you want to.
Wow, this is so fascinating because I this year left a long-term relationship, and that is exactly the reason why I left, is what you've said, is yeah, it was, I kind of almost lost my identity in the process of who I was. And I knew myself beforehand, but then somehow with this relationship over the years, I didn't know who I was anymore. And I guess I almost like rebirthed a new me. And so yeah, it really is about being more with myself and feeling freer and just allowing
And it's
myself.
also, sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
it's also for you in so many ways, like allowing yourself to be angry,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
giving yourself permission for that, because your
Yeah.
default mechanism is to come back to a sense of equilibrium and balance. So you might be the first to say sorry, when really it's not your place to say sorry. And but yeah, the North Node in Aries is a tricky one, because you're learning what Stephen Forrest coined as enlightened selfishness, you know.
Ooh.
And so yeah, and Aries is the first sign. It's birth. And if you think about birth, if you've, given birth yourself, or, I've been in two birthing experiences, so one that's 22 now and one that's 19 months. And it's fire, screaming and intensity and like just the beauty of birth. And that's what Aries is. It's this intense, untamed fire of coming into existence. And it's also the warrior archetype. That warrior archetype is being able to defend itself, and sometimes you have to be able to defend yourself. It's like there's people out there trying to harm you. And
Yeah.
if you're always trying to compromise with those people, then you get nowhere but trampled over. And so sometimes in this lifetime, that's what you're learning is going towards that masculine spiritual warrior archetype. And and many times when I have a client that has an Aries North Node, or say the Scorpio energy that you have with the Mercury and Pluto, I'm going to recommend them, do jujitsu or do some sort of martial art or Tai Chi or some sort of, movement that is not creating a stasis, but actually generating energy in a way that can make you more, what's the word? Assertive.
This is fascinating. Honestly, this is fascinating. Yeah, again, like with the whole anger thing you were saying, I grew up not being allowed to be angry because within my
Yeah.
culture, so I suppressed it. And then I guess when my heart opened it when I was 25, the anger came out. It was rage. Everyone got the rage. It was
Yes.
awful and it was
But that's
toxic.
okay. That's okay.
But
That's
it's
okay.
okay. Yeah, because
It's okay.
it was years of repression.
Yeah,
So,
totally. Well, but that's the thing. And that's, when we look at, we're born into this life and we have our South Node, and we have some karma to heal, or maybe there was a skip step or something. And so the first 30 years of life is redeveloping in our current form similar patterning around that karma. So the first 30 years of life is about ego identification and how the world sees us, which develops the thing that we have to heal from. And so if we can look at that first 30 years and be like, oh shit, that was hard, that sucked. But then we don't have to punish ourselves for it, because it gave us the opportunity to heal from the stuff that we're healing from as we go from 30 to 60. And these are wrapped around our Saturn returns, which happens every 29 and a half years.
oh wow.
And
I didn't know
so,
that.
yeah. And so there's different demarcation points that happen around 7 or 8 years old, 14, 15, 21, 22, and then 28 through 30. And so it's a Saturn square, a Saturn opposition, another Saturn square, and then the Saturn return. And
This is
so,
crazy. Sorry, I just want to say this is crazy because when I was about to turn 30, I actually had a kidney operation, and that was the point where I had to learn to surrender, come back into my feminine energy, and like you said, be kinder to myself. And it's okay, to be angry. It's okay to take space. It's okay to speak your truth. And so like now
yeah.
I'm coming up to my 36th year, and you're right. Everything what you're saying right now is so true. Like I've learned it's okay to be angry, speak your truth. But you're right. Again, I don't always have to be the first to apologize. But I didn't know that there was like what you've just said now, like it's a 29 and a half year Saturn return, which is fascinating.
Yeah. And so what you're coming up on is the repeat of the Saturn square that happened at 7 or 8 years old. And the neat thing is that before seven, we're our most authentic self.
Mm.
And we're learning from 0 to 7 how around 7 or 8 years old, we start to realize that the world is bigger than just our family and our home. And that's when our family really starts to influence us to a certain degree around, what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. We become more conscious of that. It's also a time when we maybe might not consciously remember it, but we start to understand that our parents are not the gods that we've made them out to be.
Yeah.
And seriously, I mean, I've got, well, 4 kids. There's two and then 2 stepkids, but like, it's interesting how as they become teenagers and they start telling you to F off, that that at one point in time they could never stop being around you.
Mm.
But the 7 or 8 year old mark is definitely a time frame in which at 36, 37, we start to really dive into letting go of the patterning that restricted us there. And again, this all comes back to our karma too.
Yeah.
And so maybe there is something that happened when you were 7 or 8 that caused you to, like so many people, especially with a chart like yours that has tons of creativity and that kind of thing. And maybe you're like this little, I'm going to be a writer. Or I'm going to be, I'm going to be like this person that, and again, you're doing podcasting. So that's part of, what the chart suggests. But there's so much more to what you were interested in at that age. If you can go back and remember that, it's going to give you some insight into discharging whatever restrictions there are going forward. And then there's going to be another one in the early 40s. And that's the Saturn opposition that you had at 14, 15. And that's when we really deal with a lot of our mother karma, and really pushing back. It's interesting because, at 14, 15 years old, and we have a 14-year-old here, they think they can take on the world and do whatever they want. But in reality, in hindsight, they just know enough. They don't know enough to really go out into the world. And so somebody that might be reacting to that in their early 40s, just say the guy leaves his wife and goes and buys the Aston Martin. I'll use a reference of UK. Excuse me. And instead of really working on, what they were trying to free themselves from at 14, because 14 is about, excuse me. Okay. 14 is about our peers, and our peers are really influencing us. And then around 21, 22 is when society starts to really get its hold on us, because we're at that college graduating age, or the time when we start to feel the pressure of what we're supposed to do. And then we pick something, such as myself. I picked computers because I was good at it, but I was never passionate about it. And so in so many ways, we can look at these different areas. And I've been, doing talks and talking to different entrepreneurs about hiring processes of people in this age range and what to look for, and also what to help out in regards to people that you really love and enjoy and having, and how to nurture that at certain points. But that's a whole nother topic.
I was just going to go back to one thing, and then I do want to ask you about that, how you're helping individuals and groups in their businesses through astrology. It's so interesting you're saying about the age of 7, because I remember a lot about my past. I remember everything from even when I was 2, like pockets of things. But 7 was when I wanted to be heard and understood. So there's no surprise that I now have a podcast. I used to have a radio show. I love writing. Writing is just, it gives me power in the sense of freedom. And writing is actually what saved my life when I was 25 years old. I wrote my life story out in 7 hours. I wrote 30 pages and saw all my patterns and conditionings. So writing is what helps me to flourish and be free and be more connected back to myself.
Totally. And it's very interesting because, I mean, for a long time there, I mean, there was a lot of comparison for you and your intellect.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the big things that you would do is self comparison to people, maybe not say it out loud and feel inferior, but at the same time, if somebody said that you were dumb, it would really piss you off. And so,
Yeah.
like, it's so there's this tug of war with you and finding, like the imposter syndrome and that kind of thing and battling that. But at the same time, there is a very deliberate, conservative, let's call it, perspective when it comes to you sitting down and writing and putting something out there that is, when we think about the virtues of conservatism, it's hard work and duty, right? And so
Hmm.
when you get to those places in which you're dutiful or you put in hard work,
Hmm.
that's the area in which you're the most powerful, because what you're getting out of that is your sense of self-worth, and it's being manifested into the material world.
Hmm.
And it's very, very, very interesting to I cannot overstate how powerful you are. And I think that maybe you need to hear that to a certain degree, but at the same time, it makes you feel icky. So I'm
Oh no,
not
I
going to
embrace it now.
overstate. Good.
It took me a long
Um,
time.
yeah.
A lot of people
And
have told me that over the years, but I didn't believe it. But it's because I didn't know my own power at that time. And I think I was afraid of it being a woman, but also being a woman as color.
sure.
I was always restricted. But even what you're saying about the comparison is like, I'm not really one to compare in general. But what, because of like my upbringing and, you have comparisons of parents and other people's kids, it sometimes would get me angry if they would compare me to so and so's child. But it was more to do with, for me in my industry when I was a journalist, was that it didn't matter how much I showed, how much work I produced. It was like I was never good enough. But it was
Yeah.
actually not about me. It sounds awful now, I understand it, but it was to do with the color of my skin at the time. But I didn't understand it and I didn't want to accept that. I was like, no, 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 it must be my work. No, 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 there must be something else. It was only till I left
Well,
that industry that I realized how powerful I was.
totally. And also at the same time, it's not, let's call it this.
Yeah.
There are certain wounds in your chart that come from the place of communication.
Hmm.
Your Chiron, which represents our wounds in the chart, um, is in Gemini in the ninth house. And so you also have a very strong third house with the Saturn and the Uranus there and the Neptune. And there is an opposition with the Chiron and the Uranus there. And so it's interesting that while you were led into a direction of discovering the racial dynamic of why you weren't getting somewhere, it was also important for you to understand that that wasn't necessarily your place anyways.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
so being a journalist and doing what a good journalist would do, which is going out and exposing corruption and the truth of certain ways, but getting both perspectives, which we seem to have a hard time finding these days when it comes to our mainstream journalism.
Yep.
It's more narrative than
Oh,
both
100%.
sides of a. But anyway, I digress.
But you see, that's what I saw. That's when I
Yeah,
started to see the unraveling of that it wasn't true, and what I thought growing up was factual was not really factual. So yeah, I understand.
yeah. And so ultimately, it's when it comes to healing Chiron wounds, it is it's kind of a paradox because Chiron and mythology could not heal himself, but could heal others.
Oh,
And so you're not necessarily going to want to say, okay, here's my Chiron and Gemini in the ninth house. Let me go help heal others. But the way that you help heal others is just by doing the work that you are here to do and
yeah.
being an unconscious example of that for others, and it will help others heal.
Oh,
And
thank
so
you for this.
it's not an altruistic kind of thing. It's not a, oh, well, let me go to the soup kitchen because it's the right thing to do. It is, I have to overcome these wounds. And yeah, there's going to be frameworks of different things. And also, understanding that the Mars that you have in the 12th house is just a very difficult place to have Mars, and understanding what is true about your anger and what isn't true about your anger.
Mm.
And so you have to be really careful of moving the goalpost when you are angry and somebody comes at you with some things that didn't relate around the emotion of that anger.
Mm.
It's a very interesting thing for people that have Mars in the 12th house that they do, is that they can be so mad that they might lose sight of the actual reason why they're mad. It's obvious
Yeah.
projection. And so the 12th house is Pisces. It's ethereal. It's mysticism. Now you throw anger into that, and what do you have? You have a misunderstanding. And
Mm.
so before you react, and again, we've talked about this earlier on in this chat about you making sure that you can put out your anger, and this is why I was suggesting martial arts,
Yeah.
is because sometimes the anger that you're feeling isn't necessarily true.
Mm.
And knowing that with the Mars in the 12th house can help you really guide you to where, if you have an outlet through some sort of physical activity, you know, banging a hammer on a nail, building something, that's another way. It can be so many different, like, getting a punching bag,
Yeah.
again, divine spiritual warrior archetype is
It's
that.
within. Oh, sorry, Karen.
And so with that, you'll understand that Mars in the 12th house more from a divine perspective instead of more of a humanistic reactionary perspective. It's a really, it's a conundrum, because
Mm.
when you're not living through a very emotional kind of anger, then your intuitive qualities are off the chart, and you can be more assertive with that, and less, oh, I don't know if I should say that because I could be wrong.
Mm.
And so that's the battle within this Mars direction of what
Mm.
you're trying to work through, and understanding the ramifications of how your anger got the best of you in a previous incarnation. This lifetime, it's been hard for you to use it because you feel that, and then rebalancing that through the lens of divine spiritual warrior archetype.
This is just fascinating because my surname actually means warrior, so it's like double warrior energy within me. But also, I have flashbacks from past lives where I've been a
Yeah.
warrior, so I see it sometimes. I'm like, oh god, this is nuts. But I've
Yeah.
embraced it more now. But yeah, I do definitely reflect on my anger now more than I probably did a decade ago, and I sometimes sit there and go, was that really necessary? Was that a bit? Was I overthinking that? So I do sit there and reflect now and think, okay, yeah, maybe I needed to calm down. And I did used to do gymnastics as a child for a long
Ooh,
time, and
that's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
that used to ground me a lot. So I'm trying to get back into it. I tried doing yoga and lots of other things. Tai Chi has been on my list, so I will try
Yeah.
that. Thank you. But yeah, I want to go back to, how are you helping people through astrology within their life, their businesses, and their relationships?
Well, it's the last few years, I have found myself more and more moving into a direction of working with entrepreneurs. My wife is a pretty successful entrepreneur here in Nashville. She owned Reed PR, and um, you know, the sheepish side of me is she was my client at one point, but it was written in the stars.
Hmm.
Um, and and so our origin story is very interesting, and I'm not going to get into that today. But shortly before that, I started to find myself in the room with more influential people, podcast people, different, let's call it B-list celebrities, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and what I started to understand, especially after I went and saw some people that I really trust, and to help me understand what was going on, was where I'm at in the practice is working with people that have tentacles that spread further than just doing my one-on-one all the time.
Hmm.
And so while I still do one-on-one readings, I love it. It's like, the basis of my existence in so many ways. I've cut back on that to give more space to doing podcasts and to do different things where I'm working with entrepreneurs and groups of people and that kind of stuff and workshops. And then there was this amazing epiphany that my wife had last November, in which we have the foundation of our new business, which is going to slowly build over time. It's called the North Node Leader.
Ooh.
And with that, her and I joining forces and working together in a spiritual partnership that takes her strengths, and she is an unbelievable PR entrepreneur. Let's call her an entrepreneur. She employs 16, I think 16 amazing women here in Nashville. That is not by design, by the way. She would love to hire a man if they would apply. The male PR people out there that are looking to move to Nashville. Um,
You're right, they
but
hardly exist.
yeah, yeah, I just don't,
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. I don't know what the number is, and she'll probably get mad at me for saying this because I'm going to make this number up, but I'm feeling like it's like 50 to 1 or 100 to 1 for like applicants. It's like,
Honestly, I remember being in the journalism world and we'd get press releases. You're right. I don't remember there being that many guys that would send
yep,
press releases. That's so fascinating.
yep. And
Hmm.
so what's interesting and ironic at the same time is that her first employee that she hired was a man. This
Ah,
is this is 10 years ago.
wow.
Um, but anyway, so she has an amazing grasp at a more, let's call it spiritual without saying it's spiritual approach to entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
She's somebody that um, was raised in a way that created self-sufficiency. She is learning in this lifetime how to be a mother. She's got 4 kids now, and 2 with me.
Hmm.
Well, 1 with me. My son, my oldest, 22, is her stepson, and they have a great relationship. They're actually going out to dinner tonight.
Oh.
Um, but she is the embodiment of what the future of entrepreneurship looks like. She understands the data points, but also the sort of intuitive leadership qualities that's needed when we present and empower our employees to be more true to their individuality. And so she had a shakeup in her business a little over a year ago, in which she lost her number 2. And so now she has 4 in management positions that are doing a more, let's call it, equitable work on the rest of the business. And the business has grown like 100% in a year because of it.
Wow.
And so during COVID, she lost something like 40, 50, 60%. If she was here, she'd give me an exact number of her business within a week. Um, and then she had the idea to pivot to to working with nursing homes.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And yeah, I think there's a New York Times article that was written about it, because she's like, well, where's the need right now? Where is the
Hmm.
need? And so she started calling. She created a COVID hotline for the nursing homes, and she got her business up and had her best year yet during COVID, and that's since grown from there. But she's has this ability to, one, to be impeccable, in her word. It's very important for her to take, because 3 of the management position employees that she had are still in their 20s, and help nurture them to be the most and best versions of themselves. And she does it in her own way, which is going to work great with us collaborating together and working with entrepreneurs that maybe might be looking for the next step. Like Lauren has been in this business for 10 years. What is the next step for her? Is it to sell the business? Is it to sell employees? Is it to, create another business with her husband? And so it's a very interesting combination of me and the mind, body, spirit, because I also am very much
Hmm.
about nutrition and creating a foundation within the body that creates the patterning so that we can actually sit still. um, and the mind, and what we're reading, what we're regurgitating, what we're absorbing, who we're around, and all of that, and spirit, which is can be astrology, it can be art, it can be surfing, it could be whatever it is. Because again, sometimes an entrepreneur might have a little bit of a pushback when it comes to the woo-woo side of everything, and I'm fine with that. Like, I'm a guy that went to the Tennessee UVA football game the other day with his kids, and
Mm.
I love basketball, and while I'm very much a woo woo kind of guy, I'm very much grounded in typical dude stuff. um, and so and that relatability goes a long way when you walk into an entrepreneur, or going and hanging out on Necker Island, forming impact and being around people that are worth whatever they're worth, and
Mm.
feeling as though that you aren't inferior to that. And nobody
Yeah.
should feel inferior to that anyways, but it's just that,
Yeah.
sometimes when, I grew up with pretty poor, 1,000 square foot house. My grandfather never made over, I think it was $8,000 or $9,000 in a year.
Wow.
Um, but they had
Mm.
everything that they ever needed. And they saved, and they owned their house, and just were great examples that I wasn't really taking on for a long time, but am now.
With what you're saying about Necker Island, I feel like anyone who goes there, who they've all built businesses from a spiritual place. It doesn't have to be all woo woo, but there's elements of spirituality, and I see it within so many people that I'm around as well. That we we didn't mean to go into spirituality, but it just came to us when we were meant to receive it. And so, like,
Yep.
even with myself, I didn't believe in spirituality. Like, I worked in a pharmacy when I was at university, so I was like pro medications. My mum was a nurse. I was always like,
Mm.
no, take this if you've got a headache, take that.
Yep.
But when the journey led me from within, it was like, oh, why do people need to take so and so medications? Why do I need to take that? Maybe I just need to rest. So it's when you're ready to hear the message. And spirituality is nothing new. Spirituality has been here before medicines, before
Mhm.
doctors and things. And I think we've just been raised in a world that thinks that the first thing that we need are medications. Like, and I'm not saying that medications are bad. Like, we need both in this world, but I
Yep,
think
absolutely.
we need to balance it. And that was one of my journeys with my health condition, was that I needed to have the scans to know that there was a problem, but also I needed the spiritual side, also the health, like you were talking about, like the nutrition side, to actually heal it fully. So it's a beautiful blend. But I think it's the timing. Like, a lot of people from my past life, I call them, think I've gone a bit woo a bit nuts. They're all like, who is she? Because I'm completely a different person now, but I'm me now. And I think before I was being somebody I wasn't. So I'm my true self. But
Totally.
spirituality is being your true self. And I think that's what is happening now more than ever in this world, is that people are making businesses and becoming entrepreneurs from a spiritual side that is more aligned with who they are and what their values are, whereas before it was more like that dominant aggressive kind of energy, get shit done, I guess, when I look back
Yeah,
at it.
and it's interesting because in some ways, it can be important for somebody that gets trapped in a space of, just for the lack of a better phrase, victimhood. They
Mm.
might need some of those, hey, shake yourself up,
Yeah.
dust yourself off, and get out in the world.
Wow.
Sometimes people need that. And it's really depending upon their chart, because again, we can get trapped into this space of everything is everybody else's fault. And then all of
Mm.
a sudden, where are we there? And I think we
Yeah.
can all relate. I mean, I'm 48 years old. There's been moments when I've felt that way. And I was born, I know nobody can see, but I was born without a foot, and I've had deformed
Wow.
fingers. And my mom was married 3 times before I was 5, and there was abuse there, and guns, and
Mm.
I mean, you name it growing up. And again, there's my grandparents, as I mentioned earlier, the saving grace. But there's also the coping mechanisms and everything that came out of that. But what
Mm.
never stopped out of all of that, I didn't see my father for 10 years. The
Wow.
first time I remember intuitively picking up on energy, I was 14 years old, and a young girl that I had rode my bike 25 miles to see saw my foot. Her energy went, whoop, see you later.
Oh.
Um, like all these things, I
Hmm.
never was not optimistic.
Hmm.
I was definitely affected by coping mechanisms. I was definitely affected by procrastination and certain things
Hmm.
such as that had been something that made me what I considered to be lazy. And I very much was. And so somebody like myself needed somebody like, I don't know if you know who Dave Goggins is,
Oh, I don't know.
but Dave Goggins is this really rugged, tough kind of, ex-military, African American male that, dealt with all the things that, he would have dealt with, had everything wrapped up in his reasoning on why he was 300 and some pounds at a certain point. And now he's a guy that went through Hell Week 3 times in for the Navy SEALs, and is pushed himself beyond the scope. He did like 100 mile races or 10 weeks in a row. Like he's done all these crazy things. And so there's some merit to that, of our preconceived notions of limitation, that sometimes it takes a bit of grit to push ourselves out of. And I'm definitely an example of that. While we can't always be, the extreme, super hard, at times we might lose faith in that. Like you came up in an upbringing that forced that, so a little bit too much for you.
Yeah.
But the good news is that you still have some of that,
Oh,
or
yeah.
you have difficulty asserting yourself out into the world and putting yourself into a space of understanding your proper place and what you have to share and what you have to offer. But I totally get the whole idea around, the old school, like Mad Men, if you ever watched that show, kind of like, the men have their place and the women have their place and all that bullshit. But like in this day and age, because we're much less active, we're not hunter gatherers, we're not, we're sitting behind computers and being sedentary. Sometimes we don't know what we're capable of until somebody like myself goes out and does a 50K, breaks his foot on mile 5 and finishes. That I could have never done that at 35 or 40 years old. Because if you want to call it intestinal fortitude or whatever it is, but I can tell you, when I heard, this is a race called Yamacraw, when I heard the crowd, I was about a half a mile to a mile away from the finish line, and I'm limping away. I mean, the tears just exploded out of my face, realizing that I'm about to cry now. But like the accomplishment of that, and what that meant to me in my life, and all the hurdles and all the hard things and all the excuses and all the reasoning for failure. And to be able to finally do something like that was like just liberating. And so now there's nothing, because I was able to do that. And again, this isn't for everybody. This is for certain people, such as myself, that might have a South Node square of the Venus and Virgo, and we're just, trying to get by. But yeah, no, that was a very powerful experience for me, and I think I'm ready to do another one, to be honest.
That's amazing. Wow. That's, it reminds me of the hero's journey. That's what it reminds me of. Like, it was like coming back home.
It definitely was that.
Yeah.
Definitely, because look, I mean, I'm already missing a foot, and then to break a little bone, or like fracture a little bone in the inside part of my left foot on mile 5 or 6. I was running along with a pack, and I was feeling really good, and I'm not really fast. And then all of a sudden, I felt like Forrest Gump, like something bit me, and I collapsed, and my foot fell in this hole, and I thought I sprained it, but I mean, I was just limping the whole way, and like it's a long Yamacraw is a long 50K. I think it's like 33 miles, and so I had 28 more miles to go.
Wow. I'm so proud of you. That's just powerful. That just shows anything is possible when we really truly believe in our power, even when we're in pain and we don't even realize it. But it's the power to know that we are powerful beyond what we know, and that we can achieve anything in our life if we put our mind to it. There's no restrictions in life. We are the ones that hold ourselves back and create these restrictions. And with what you're saying as well, it makes me realize with myself, like things that I thought I could never achieve, actually looking back, like, wow, that just blows me away, that when we allow ourselves to just be free and be vulnerable and like you said, like just take action in those moments, like anything is possible. Like it doesn't matter about your circumstances or your background or where you came from. You can achieve anything.
No, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. We are coming towards the end of the show. That's gone really fast, by the way. I've got a few more questions for you.
Right.
What are your 5 top tips for someone who is struggling to find their soul's purpose?
this is might sound a little bit different than what you think I'm going to say, but I would say
Okay.
stop trying so hard.
Mm.
Our soul's purpose is really guided through what we're interested in. And
Mm.
so when we're really in distress or really like lost in what we're supposed to do, your soul is going to make you curious about something. And it might not be exactly the thing that you will eventually end up doing, but it will lead you there.
Mm.
And so my suggestion would be to stop trying so hard and follow your curiosity. Sounds simple, but it's very hard.
Mm. Yeah. It's that thing, isn't it? With this fast, quick fix, like not quick fix, I think the word is rushing to the next big success.
Yeah.
But when you
Well,
slow
and
down,
again, this is why my basic fundamental, like everything that I rest my hat on comes from, let's just say, the yin yang or the Tao or chaos
mm.
and order balanced. And if you look at the yin yang, and you'll see that there's a dot of chaos on the order side and a dot of order on the chaos side. And so whenever we're in a deep space of despair, that means there's too much chaos. And we need to start bringing some order back into balance. And that's where delayed gratification comes from. And look, you've been getting your ass kicked for years. Delayed gratification, you don't want to hear that, but I've lived it. And so I'm happy to share my stories on never doing that and actually delaying my path into wholeness because I kept looking for quick fixes, like, oh,
Mm.
well, let me do day trading on the stock market. Let me all the different things that I thought I could be good at and was good. It was enough there to where it would dangle itself, but it definitely wasn't the truth
Mm.
of my path. Or going into real estate. And again, somebody might look at my chart and say, oh, yeah, you can do real estate, but can do real estate and actually do what you're here to do? Not necessarily.
Mm.
But again, in both of those places, it showed me what I wasn't supposed to do.
Mm.
And so there's always value in the thing that we're curious about that we go towards. But if we're always going towards these things based on fear, and those fears was, oh, well, I need to value myself through money. I can make a lot of money in stock market or real estate, and thus my ex-wife will love me more. No, that was definitely, but again, that hard fought lesson is what I have to hold now in my current
Mm.
relationship, and knowing that in that path, no matter what I did in that space, the idea of me creating something of a facade around myself isn't what somebody can love. They have to love the truest form of me,
Mm.
and that is this goofy guy that knows how to talk about things when it comes to spirituality, and it seems to have impacted people over the last 15 years, and it seems mostly positive. And I say that without ego. I'm supposed to say that. I've been told that because I've been so afraid of my ego in this for so long, because my ego got the best of me at the very beginning of my
Mm.
path back 2008, 2009. Basically not thinking your shit stinks because everybody's telling you how great you are. Coming from the guy that like didn't get the girls in high school, that kind of thing, like all of a sudden, like, oh, what's going on here, and then it goes to your head. And so there's been a slow rebuild over the last 8 or 9 years of how to believe in yourself and what you do, even talk about it, without
Mm.
it coming across as arrogant or feeling like what you're saying is coming across as arrogant. And so I'm unpacking my own shit that I'm dealing with right now. Right now.
Bless you. Um, what's the second tip you would give about
What's
finding your
that?
soul's? What's your second tip you would give about finding your soul's purpose?
Find a really good astrologer that focuses on the nodes.
Mm. Well, they basically come to you.
No, I mean, it doesn't have to be me. There's a lot of evolutionary astrologers out there that are really great at what they do.
Mm.
The thing about it is that I'm more of a feeling astrologer. I'm not the most technical astrologer, so I'm very different.
Mm.
The words that come out of mouth can sound technical, but if you put me in a room with other astrologers, they could run circles around my technical ability, and I'm comfortable with that. I wasn't for 10 years, and that's why it took me 10 years to become an astrologer. But once I got over that and realized
Mm.
that, the feeling around this was more important than just being able to talk about a sesquiquadrant or whatever asteroid that's all the craze right now. Um, yeah, it's not part of my language. And astrology is about language. And so if an astrologer
Mm.
is coming from the heart, even if the most technical astrologer, then they're going to have a lot to share when it comes to the potentiality. And so I like to focus on astrology that is node centric, because the nodes are coming from a place of the south node is, our karmic story. I've been telling karmic
Oh.
stories for 15 years. And what that karmic story representative of is a past life that you can take either literally or figuratively, that you've come into this lifetime to heal.
Wow.
So when we understand that fundamentally, there's so much grace we can give ourselves, but most importantly, we can give to other people. Why was that person a jerk to me? Well,
Mm.
because I needed it. And that sounds awful. But again, the self-reflection of again, keeping balance between both sides,
Mm.
so that we can take personal responsibility of our own karma too.
Yeah.
Nobody deserves to be hurt. That's not what I'm saying. That's
Yeah.
that's absolutely fundamentally not it. And I can weed into dangerous territory in talking about this in too much gory detail. But sometimes when it comes to our spirituality and getting into the nuts and bolts of it, we have to understand why I dealt with an abusive stepfather who beat my mother when I was 3, and not
Oh.
hold anger with him. You know,
Mm. Wow.
why was I born the way that I was and then treated the way that I was growing up? Like,
Mm.
and that's the interesting thing about me talking about these things, is that because I've experienced it,
Yeah.
there's less of this, oh, well, how can you understand? Um, yeah, I mean, I've embraced my life and the toughness around it. And again, I don't know what I would have done without my grandparents. I probably wouldn't be
Mm.
talking to you. But
Wow.
again, to me, that's by design.
Yeah.
I was told by a psychic in 2008, shortly after I became a professional astrologer, that I was born with my hands and feet to learn sensitivity.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Wow.
And
Wow.
she said that the reason for that is because in a past life I had learned all kinds of esoteric truths and whatever, and this could all be just to make my head feel good, um, but that I didn't share it. I kind of just went up and became a
Mm.
hermit, and sometimes I want to be a hermit.
I
Um,
understand that. I think that I think
yeah,
everything happens for a reason, and we
yeah,
choose contracts. Like no, I'm like nodding right. Like even when I think about, so I was born with a kidney defect, and I didn't know till I was 30 years old. So my whole
yeah,
life didn't have a clue. My mum actually worked in the kidney renal unit, didn't have a clue herself, which was a big shock to her. And I used to always have pain in my right side when I like go
mm,
running, I again being that warrior energy. Oh, it's just a stitch. It's just a stitch. So I kept my whole life I was in pain without
yeah,
knowing. And then hit 30, and they discovered I had a knot at the top of my kidney. My urethra pipe was basically knotted my whole life, and then my kidney was smaller as well. So that, and that, when I look now, which I've reversed, thank God. I saved it. There was a reason why I needed to save it, but also I had kidney disease after, which I reversed it, thank God. But that was, and people, it might sound strange, and this is why what I'm saying is like I understand where you're coming from, but that was to teach me to be more connected with my emotions. That was
mm,
to be kinder to myself, to love myself, to surrender, to not be always in action mode or trying to run for the next thing. It was
yeah,
about surrendering. So my kidney has been the biggest blessing to me, which I needed. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. That it was like, my life is over. Why, the victim mode.
right.
Why me? Why universe? But now I understand it. It taught me to slow down and trust the wisdom from in and the medicine, and be gentle with myself, which again, I'm guessing from another lifetime, again, like yourself, like I wasn't kind to myself. So I feel like everything happens for a reason, and everything is a blessing if we're willing to see it that way.
Right. And that can, it's just an interesting way of looking at the world and looking at people and looking at, our current situation, and and how we define ourselves through this particular identity that we are now.
Yeah.
and maybe sometimes forgetting how many identities that we've had before that. And
Yeah.
so it's doing, I don't know how many thousands of karmic stories that I've done. We've been the victim, we've been the villain, we've been
Mm.
the opposite gender, we've been the opposite race, we've been so many
Yeah.
different things, that if maybe we could all start to keep that in perspective, the haters and the people that feel like they're hated, then maybe they would be less apt to hate or feel like they're hated. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to change that. I don't know if we're supposed to change that. I don't know if we're supposed to live here to work on the ability to transcend all that. That's what this plane is for.
Mm.
But these are thoughts that I ponder at times when I'm feeling extra philosophical.
Bless you. What's your third tip for finding your soul's purpose? So we've got,
Oh wow.
so the first one was about surrendering and slowing down. The second one was about astrology and looking at your chart. What's the third? What do you say?
I would say the third is, and again, this is, I don't want to, I'll give specifics, but embrace your creative form of self-expression.
Mm.
Now, in our societies, a lot of times people, instead of grabbing that guitar or sitting down at that piano or going and typing a memoir or whatever, their first perspective is judgment.
Mm.
And we have to remember that we're very curious about certain things that, and again, there's a lot of creativity out there. I built a mailbox once. that was my creative stance for the week or two it took me to do it. There's people that surf. There are people that climb mountains. There are people that hike or run trails. My trail running was such a therapeutic thing.
Mm.
That can be your creative form of self-expression. There's just so many different ways of creating and making up your own creative form of self-expression that ignites such a different part of the brain, of the soul. And it doesn't have to be good. And it just needs to be something in which that you're looking at and you're wondering if you can.
Mm. It's
And
like, oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead. No,
I
go
was going
ahead.
to say, it's like during COVID, a lot of people started to do gardening or they started to grow plants and vegetables that they'd never done in their life. And,
Yeah.
some of the tomatoes grew, some of them were rotten, but everybody was like learning.
Yep.
And it was like, it was that creativity, wasn't it? You didn't know what was going to happen next. Will it grow? Will it not grow? Will it, how will this taste? All those kind of things, which is connected to our senses.
And another thing to do is go to a park that has a lot of little kids, that are in that 4, 5, 6-year-old age, and just watch what they do
Hmm.
and try to bring some of that behavior back to your everyday life. I know you're not going to walk up to a little kid or an adult and go, "You want to be friends?" But think about how freeing that is.
Yeah.
They're shy kids, but once they get over that shyness, they're out there running around just like all the other crazy kids. And they're in the sandbox, they're picking their nose, they're like, whatever, like we don't care.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's, a creative form of self-expression coming from a child's eyes. They don't care what their art looks like. I got a 19-month-old that takes the pen out of my hand every time he gets a chance and starts scribbling on paper. Like, then he runs over. He's been crawling over to the piano since he was 10 months old and pulling himself up and playing little
Oh,
ditties. Look at my Instagram. He's on there doing it.
oh.
And so,
What's
like,
your
yeah, I mean, and so
yeah.
we're going to cultivate that. We're not going to tell him to stop. We're going to just let him do it. And we're not going to put him in this idea of projected prodigy because he's doing that either. Like, go play. Like last night, go play the piano, you know, go bang on it, whatever you want to do. Like, make what you want to make.
Okay, so it's four more. Sorry, two more tips. So the fourth tip.
Okay. So this is going to go into more of the biological makeup of our bodies. And it's going to be drinking lots of mineral water,
Hmm.
um, and eating as much bioavailable food as possible. Um, and staying away from vegetable and seed oils, and basically getting your body into a space that is not overwhelmed by lots of unnatural things. Vegetable oils are processed, manufactured seed oils. They're not natural things. We're told that they're healthy, but excess linoleic acid is really the precursor, and also, the biggest part of metabolic dysfunction that we have. It's like the silent killer. It takes a long time. And so sugar, it's obviously one of those things that gets vilified. But if you're eating a very clean diet without a whole lot of excess linoleic acid, then sugar is not going to be an issue, especially if it's coming from fruit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so lots of mineral water. Because if you're just drinking regular water that doesn't have minerals in it, you're just going to dehydrate yourself. So you need minerals. You need to, I'm drinking Mountain Valley right now here in the States. It's out of Arkansas, and it's got calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And it comes right out of the mountain. And then I really stay away from the processed foods. Just about everything that's out there has seed oils in it. Good luck finding things that don't have it.
Thank you so much, Brad, for being the show, and just coming back home to yourself and being your authentic self and helping people to really understand their charts and know that they can take their power back in any moment.
Absolutely.
Gosh, it's so fascinating learning about astrology and the power of how everything aligns with us and that everything is here to help and support us. Now, if you're stuck with where you're heading right now, do speak with Brad and see what it is in your astrological chart that is holding you back. Unfortunately, that's the end of the show. Before I leave, I want to leave you with this quote. Nothing happens in astrology unless it needs to happen. That's a quote by Stephen Forrest. And if you're struggling to transform trauma and want to learn how to trust yourself so you can powerfully move forward in your life, visit my website at www.gerdshundle.com and book in a call with me, and let's make a plan together. Take care, my sisters. Bye. For more information about the show or how to trust your inner light, visit my new coaching program at gerdshundle.com. And remember, stay happy, stay healthy, stay lit.